Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, August the 3rd, 2022. First off, let's see whether World War III has started yet. Headlines from Drudge. Pelosi stares down Xi's threats, giving reality check. Trip culmination of decades challenging Beijing. U.S. China tensions flare. White House scrambles to avoid crisis. Taiwan defiant. Drills invade waters. Missiles over island. Effective blockade begins. Yeah, good work on scrambling to avoid that crisis, White House. And my favorite, American Witch, which reminds me of Jin Yang from Silicon Valley. She's a white witch. Yes. So let's get stupid. That's what the world has decided to do. Well, half of it at any rate. This is from compactmag.com by Malcolm Kayuni. America isn't ready for war with China. Despite loud Chinese protests, the U.S. is sending one of its top officials to Taiwan. Nancy Pelosi will be the highest-ranking American visitor to the island in 25 years. China's response has not been confined to the realm of words. Roll-on, roll-off ferries have suddenly deviated from their normal schedules. Air defense assets are being moved around, and the Chinese army is now conducting sudden snap exercises in provinces bordering the straits. It is hard to avoid the impression that Pelosi, an unpopular, doddering octogenarian, is auditioning for the role of America's Franz Ferdinand. Meanwhile, America, like Austria-Hungary before it, seems to have entered a period of decadence as it lurches toward a war it does not want to fight and has no guarantee of winning. It would be foolish to assume that China is bluffing, or that the U.S., with its military in crisis, its social fabric fraying, and its economy in crisis, is ready to fight a two-front conflict against China and Russia. Afghanistan was a disaster. Ukraine is currently turning into a quagmire, not for Russia, but for the entire Western alliance system. Other than cheap bromides about not wearing a tie to work to save energy or taking colder showers, but wait, I think we'll learn later on that cold showers kill young men. Okay, so be careful about those cold showers. The politicians of America's European NATO allies have absolutely no plan, no recourse, no means of extracting themselves from the looming social and political crisis that will hit them this winter because of the loss of Russian energy supplies. And yet the U.S. is walking into a completely predictable conflict with China while having no real plans for what it will do once the shooting starts. This already happened with Russia. Nobody seemed to give any thought to how energy sanctions would impact the West, but it promises to be even worse in the Chinese case. To take but one example, China currently dominates the global market on inputs necessary to make generic antibiotics. The U.S. is thus almost entirely reliant on China for the basic medical innovation that separates us from the Middle Ages, when mere cuts could turn lethal due to bacterial infection. Were America in 2022 a serious imperial power, plans would have already been in place to build up massive stocks of medical supplies and to shift production home. This is not being done. In fact, pretty much nothing of the sort is being done, despite the U.S. extensive reliance on China. Instead, America's loyal mandarins are editing the definition of recession on Wikipedia in order to pretend the U.S. isn't currently in one. In case U.S. antibiotic supplies are cut off, Americans will almost certainly be asked to take special measures to avoid getting sick, because at no point did the current American elites bother to ensure that easily treatable sickness would still be easily treatable in 2024, rather than a possible death sentence. Neither the American military nor the American economy is in any way ready for what happens if the proverbial black hand decides to strike. Those preparations could be made, but the empire is too sclerotic, too corrupt, too dysfunctional to plan ahead. Like their counterparts in Europe, America's elites will simply hope that things work out, or that when they go catastrophically wrong, that people nevertheless won't get angry enough to start wrecking the political system. I am no pacifist, Malcolm K. Uni writes. And yes, I am no pacifist, and this column is not intended as some sort of call for people to take another hit of the bong while imagining the lyrics of that John Lennon song. A conflict between China and the West is likely inevitable, but competent empires plan ahead and prepare for contingencies. They ask very natural questions in advance, questions like, what will happen to the US civilian population if we can no longer obtain antibiotics or insulin? And then they answer those questions with material preparation beforehand. America used to ask these questions. It used to make these preparations. It used to be an effective power, but it no longer does or is. Everyone can see that now. If there was any doubt left after Ukraine, Taiwan is likely to dispel them. It's a shame. Perhaps Joe Biden is the perfect president for the current moment. Just as Biden, the man, is visibly sundowning, the America that he leads now seems to be in the throes of advanced senility. The empire no longer has any idea what its core interests are, so everything is. Protecting women's football teams in Kabul is just as important as Ukraine NATO accession, which is just as important as Taiwanese independence. And because everything is equally important, nothing really is, because nothing actually gets done right. American leaders today think the nation's credibility is at risk whenever it fails to take a stand. In fact, that credibility has been shredded above all by their repeated failures when they do. Again, this is a piece by Malcolm Kayuni at compactmag.com called America Isn't Ready for War with China. Oh, and China doesn't provide anything important to us. No, just everything. Not quite everything, but close. And just to give you an idea of sclerosis, here's a message. This is not a parody, a message from the president of the San Francisco Federal Reserve, Mary Daly. No relation to the other Mary Daly, who was a, how would I put it, blasphemous lesbian professor at Boston College for decades. But this is what Mary Daly has to say. Quote, I don't feel the pain of inflation anymore. I see prices rising, but I have enough. I sometimes balk at the price of things, but I don't find myself in a space where I have to make trade-offs because I have enough. And many Americans have enough, unquote. Is that her attempt at the blitz spirit? I don't know. She might be a little put out. When America runs out of antibiotics, when it runs out of acetaminophen, say, to give an example, when it runs out of all these generic drugs, do you know that all of the casings for sausages that are sold in the West come from China? All of them. And I could, come up with other examples. But Mary Daly's not bothered, so I suppose that's the most important thing. And there's another piece from Compact, excellent publication. This is by Daniel P. Goldman, Sleepwalking into War with China. Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan marks the beginning of a new and dire strategic crisis with China. Whether by accident or design, the Biden administration is sleepwalking into war with China quickly, but not quickly enough for most Republican leaders. While the United States wasted $6 trillion or more in failed nation-building campaigns during the past 20 years, China focused its military resources on surface-to-ship missiles, modern aircraft, submarines, and electronic warfare measures on its coast. If we fight China on its home seas, we will probably lose. There is a fundamental asymmetry of strategic interest in Taiwan between China and the United States. China is not a nation state, but a polyglot empire. Only 1 in 10 Chinese converses in Mandarin, the state dialect. according to a 2014 government study. Most speak one of 200 dialects. China is held together, as it has been for thousands of years, by a common tax collector in Beijing and the Mandarin bureaucracy recast as the Chinese Communist Party. One rebel province, as Beijing views Taiwan, sets a precedent for many. Countless times in its long history, China has fragmented into warring provinces, encouraged during the 19th and 20th centuries by foreign powers. Opposition to Taiwanese sovereignty is a raison d'etre of the Chinese state, and Beijing will go to war to prevent it. Beijing will tolerate the status quo, but not if it believes the United States is promoting Taiwanese sovereignty. What makes Pelosi's visit so provocative is her constitutional status as second in the line of presidential succession. A visit by an American vice president would, in diplomatic protocol, verge upon diplomatic recognition and crosses a red line. A visit by the next in line to the vice president touches that red line. America's diplomatic relations with China are based on the Shanghai Communique of 1972, which states the Chinese side reaffirmed its position that Taiwan question is the crucial question, obstructing the normalization of relations between China and the United States. The government of the People's Republic of China is the sole legal government of China. Taiwan is a province of China, which has long been returned to the motherland. The liberation of Taiwan is China's internal affair in which no other country has the right to interfere. And it goes on. So perhaps, before the United States of America decided to stab Taiwan in the back, put all its chips on China, and then outsource practically everything to China, they should have considered the possibility of provoking China over Taiwan. Goldman writes, infuriatingly, the Biden administration has refused to take responsibility for the visit. Secretary of State Antony Blinken declared that the decision is entirely the speaker's to visit Taiwan. If Pelosi had taken a commercial flight rather than an American military aircraft, Blinken's demurral would have had more credibility. President Biden told reporters in an offhand conversation that the military doesn't like it, but did nothing to dissuade Pelosi. Yes, these are the famous adults in the room who are responsible for this. Goldman concludes, we look back on the leaders of Europe in August 1914 and wonder how they could have been stupid enough to plunge the world into war from which Western civilization has not recovered. And then we watch today's news and see leaders even stupider than the malefactors of 1914. We do not need to live through this nightmare again. War is avoidable, so is the decline of the United States. Yeah, I got to take a stand, though. Take a stand, come what may. Real tough guys they are. And it just, okay, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is one thing, but the prospect of a world war because of the posturing of a demented old boot like Nancy Pelosi is just too much to bear. This is from Chris Pleasance at the Mail. 27 Chinese warplanes enter Taiwan's air defense as Taipei says it won't shy away from a fight. President Xi sends forces to surround island as part of his plan to secure his unification legacy. Whenever you hear a politician talking about securing his legacy, you know that something unpleasant is going to happen. And speaking of that demented old boot, this again is from the Mail by Walter Finch. As Beijing has erupted in anguished fury at Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, the speaker herself noted that a similar visit from an all-male boo delegation of U.S. senators earlier this year failed to elicit such a firestorm. They made a big fuss because I'm the speaker, I guess. I don't know if that was a reason or an excuse, she said during a press conference with the Taiwanese president, because they didn't say anything when the men came. Yeah, okay. It's all about because you're a woman. Just keep telling yourself that. So it seems that the I don't know, right-wing press in Britain has decided that they just love Liz, not Elizabeth, but Liz Truss. This is a deeply stupid woman, a dangerous woman. She's already said that she's going to be a bigger friend to the Ukraine than Boris Johnson was. I don't know how that would be possible. It suggests the possibility of British troops on the ground in Ukraine. And another story from the Mail, this time by David Wilcock. Liz Truss supporter Brandon Lewis rose back on her previous calls to send weapons to Taiwan and instead says the UK could offer moral or economic support to the island nation amid heightened tensions with China. What weapons might those be? The Western countries are they're quickly running out of weapons of all kind. But never mind, we always have room to send even more weapons. Now, okay, you've heard me talk about the deep greens and how they are evil. Why are they evil? Or how are they evil? Because they want a Malthusian die-off in the world. They want billions of people to die, and they want living standards to be reduced in the West to those of, what, 100, 150, 200 years ago? If you don't believe me on this, listen to this. This is by Robert Delaney, who is a columnist for the South China Morning Post. And if you go to his Twitter feed, there is a rainbow flag, because of course there is. Okay, here's how he begins. Devastating weather events, breakthrough climate legislation, economic warning signs on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's Asia-Pacific itinerary dominated the U.S. news cycle last week. As the death toll from record flash flooding rises in Kentucky, which was still recovering from a once-in-a-century barrage of tornadoes that killed scores of people in December, there's an obvious connection to climate legislation. Perhaps it was the catastrophic images of the flooding that prompted Senator Joe Manchin from neighboring West Virginia to reverse his opposition to the most comprehensive climate change bill in American history. We can only hope that concern about the floods, violent storms, and heat waves that have been torturing Americans lately might shake some Republicans in Congress out of their climate change denial. Florida Senators Marco Rubio and Rick Scott should be two of those most inclined to come to the same epiphany as Manchin. Most of their state rests on porous limestone, which allows rising sea levels to flood inhabited areas more easily than in other coastal regions. But the same ideological determination that has stripped American women of their federally protected right to abortion and stigmatized the alphabet people community with the Don't Say Gay law has an equal disdain for any efforts to address a climate crisis that is now evident in every region of the globe. Instead of supporting legislation that aims to cut greenhouse gas emissions, the core driver of climate change, they intend to burn their resources, churning out anti-China initiatives and statements on a near-daily basis, and will probably continue to do so as waves from the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico start lapping against their Florida offices, because there's never been floods in the United States before. There's never been hurricanes. There's never been tornadoes. It's all because of, climate change. Meanwhile, record high inflation and 2/4 of economic contraction in the United States have given Republicans and some Democrats looking to distance themselves from U.S. President Joe Biden as the country's midterm elections draw closer, more of a distraction from our most urgent issue. The Biden administration spent this past week explaining why negative economic growth doesn't amount to a recession, dismissing the many economists who say the downturn is coming, even if we're not there yet. Oh, climate change, devastation, Kentucky, all the stuff we feel compelled to buy. Boo! Buying things is horrible. There's no need for people to buy things, including green, in scare quotes, products like electric vehicles. You see? He's put green in scare quotes. You see, the deep greens, they don't want renewable energy. They do not want energy sources such as have existed in the past. They want to destroy the world. Oh, electric vehicles, paper packaging, and that stylish little backpack made from plastic fished out of the Pacific Ocean require logging, mining operations, freight hauling, processing, and other logistics to get them to the end user, all with significant associated carbon emissions. This contributes more to climate change than any of us acknowledge. The corporate world, including our data harvesting overlords, have harnessed the power of social media to make us believe that we're not living unless we're consuming, all of which makes us unable to understand that environmental sustainability means consuming less. And how is this? Oh, yes, a Pelosi delegation to Taiwan might be just what the Earth's natural ecosystems need. Here's the title. Pelosi, Taiwan, and Climate, Why Military Conflict Might Be Good for the Planet. Economic activity that fuels growth also drives deadly weather events. The Ukraine war has forced Europe to rethink its reliance on Russian energy. And how's that working out for them? A Taiwan Strait conflict that disrupts global trade might make us stop consuming our way to climate disaster. Again, this genocidal creep's name is Robert Delaney, and he's at the South China Morning Post and also has a Twitter feed. Let's go to the chat. Let's start at the beginning. Hello to Ann Rundon from Beyond, Phil the Kill, Dan, William Hicks, Dionysus. Hello to our valiant moderator, Chogakin666. Hello to Brian Frakes, who says missiles, drills, and blockades. Oh my. Well, of course, some of you who are as old as I might remember how a callow young president and his even more callow younger brother, Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, almost got the world blown up in 1962 because they were taking a stand. They could embargo all exports and call in all treasuries, says Jogakin666. No monkeypox ointment. Jim Smith says trade works in both directions. Hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth. We have been at war since I was born. Don't get me wrong. I love a just war, but these are not just wars, says Dionysus. Yes, the only just war that I have known of in my lifetime was Britain's war in the Falklands. Respectable commenting name, hello, says the answer is don't care, LOL. See also Brandon's first day in office spiking the price of insulin 3,000% or something. No more NBA, perhaps, says Phil the Kill. Hello to G's He Stall. I hope everyone is well. Diva the Gnome says Kevin only drinks manly tea. Well, I suppose it's pretty manly. Not like that green tea. Which apparently is full of antioxidants. William Hicks, Mary Antoinette Daly, say her name. Let them eat sausage. Chinese history is pretty interesting, says Diva the Gnome. Yes, a lot of genocide there. Of course, you don't hear about them in genocide. Is Taiwan a legitimate state? I'd say by now, probably, says Blacklisted. Well, it went from Japanese control to Chiang Kai-shek's control. Been under Japanese control since, what, 1910? Or was that Korea? I get the conquest mixed up. Don from Beyond says, in the past week, I've seen 2 movies on Netflix that feature the characters eating bugs like it's a normal thing. Hello to Ruslan Akhmatov. And will the Chai Coms be shelling Kumoy and Matsu soon? Throwback to the 50s. Yes, that takes me back, well, a little further than I could actually remember, but those islands were mentioned quite a lot when I was young. I'm tired of the stupid excuse. They know exactly what they're doing, says Phil the Kill. Well, if they know exactly what they're doing, then that situation is perhaps even more horrible. And I'm hello to Ricky Cito. The U.S. Navy sent the Spanish fleet to the bottom of Manila Bay in 1898, and that was the end of their empire. Who else do we have? How long has that picture of the polar bear on a lonely iceberg been passed around like it's the last berg on Earth? Asked Phil Kill. Were we informed reliably some years ago those Polaroids were going to be all dead by now? Russell's tone deaf inability to work with actors. Which Russell is that? Um, if you could bring 19th century, early 20th century farmers forward in time to the present, what do you think they would say about the climate stuff? They wouldn't believe it. It's ridiculous. It always has been ridiculous. There's no evidence that we are responsible for any increase in temperatures. This is all based on faked data and bogus models. There's no evidence that we could do anything about it, even if we tried, especially since China and India are not on board. Here in Canada, we are prepared to wreck, I use that word advisedly, to wreck our economy to no effect. To no effect. Formosa taken by Japan in the Sino-Japanese War, 1895, because it was Korea in 1910 then. Formosa, well, Hauper, yes, says Formosa was named by the Portuguese. It means beautiful island. It comes from the Latin, meaning comely, as in what the Song of Solomon, I believe it is. Nigra sum sed Formosa. I am black but beautiful, O ye daughters of Jerusalem. The temperature changes by up to 100 degrees in a number of days. Small changes in average temperatures have no effect on the climate, even if they were not lying about everything, says the Right Honorable. Okay. And are we still talking about? Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll just wrap this up here. This is by Joel Kotkin at American Mind. Free trade's heavy cost. How globalization became sinicization. Yes, more and more free trade means that more and more of the world will be controlled by China. Huawei is a great example, says former Duke University chair of political science Mike Mubger. This is just 5G technology. How could it not be great? It benefits consumers. How does making it possible for my fridge or my dryer to spy on me, how does that benefit me? According to this view, the U.S. and other Western companies should just get out of the way and find another business that Beijing does not care so much about dominating. The problem, however, is that we no longer live in a world where America is monumentally richer or has far greater technological prowess than its rivals. We no longer reliably call the shots. This reality has been unfolding for a generation. Asian and European nations have long prioritized their export industries, helping them gain dominance in many markets from steel and cars to semiconductors. By contrast, big American capital, bolstered by cheerleaders in the corporate media, sacrificed America's communities and the personal aspirations of countless workers for the sake of greater profits. Munger cites imported semiconductors, smartphones, and other American branded tech as big wins for our economy. This may be true for the investors who own piles of tech stock. The technology is also cool for consumers, if sometimes very pricey. But what did this system produce for the overall U.S. economy and the health of its workforce? Google, Microsoft, and the other oligarchic firms make virtually nothing here. Apple may be headquartered in Cupertino, but more than 90% of iPhones, iPads, and MacBooks are made in China, albeit designed in California. Despite their endless virtue signaling, these corporations are indifferent to the national economy. Instead, many have become China's ultimate cheerleaders and enablers, with venture capital firms raising billions to fund new firms in the Middle Kingdom, in other words, subsidizing the competition. And no surprise that Apple is at the top of the list. Kotkin writes, the incessant virtue signaling by big companies seems grossly hypocritical. Apple's Tim Cook poses as a progressive green visionary while fighting to use factories staffed by Chinese slave labor and powered largely by coal power. Cook has praised Chinese developers as the cutting edge, telling China Daily he was inspired by their innovation. Have they ever innovated anything? That's a serious question, by the way. They lease the technology or they steal it. And what's happening in Europe? This is from Jamie Phillips at the Mail. The Bank of England is set to make the biggest hike in interest rates for 27 years to 1.75% amid warnings that inflation could hit 15% at the start of next year. 15%. And how bad could it get? You may be aware of my longstanding prediction that Britain is going to be, of all the Western countries most likely to collapse, that Britain is the one that is most likely. This is from Jonathan Riley and Kate Ferguson at the London Sun. Oh, look, Kaiser Chiefs reference in the title. I predict a riot. Worried Brits expect cost of living crisis to spark crime wave, deaths, and riots. Worried Brits expect the brutal cost of living crisis to spark a crime wave, deaths, and riots, a shock poll reveals. Families fear rocketing bills will plunge the country into misery and unrest. Some 70% of the public expect many to refuse to pay energy bills, 80% expect more shoplifting, and 51% think riots will take place. And 3 in 4 expect people will die of the cold this winter, unable to afford heating. More than half of those polled, 51%, say energy and oil firms are to blame for the hike in costs, a day after Shell and British Gas reported record profits. Nearly 9 in 10, or 88%, are worried the cost of living will directly impact their everyday lives. Luke Trill, UK director of More in Common, which commissioned the research, said this should be a wake-up call to our next prime minister. People want help now. Well, Liz, not Elizabeth, but Liz Truss, seems to be far more interested in the Ukraine and in Taiwan than she is in her own country. But we've come to expect that, haven't we? This is from Project Veritas. FBI whistleblower leaks Bureau's Domestic Terrorism Symbols Guide on militia violent extremists, or MVEs, citing Ashley Babbitt as MVE martyr. And you know what are really, really bad things now, proving you an extremist? Revolutionary War imagery, such as the Gadsden flag and the Betsy Ross flag. I'm reminded the formal U.S. government indictment of Timothy McVeigh made a great deal of the fact that certain extremist documents were found in his vehicle. And included in those documents were tracts by Samuel Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Okay, George Soros had a piece in the Wall Street Journal. You may have seen it. That, justice. He's all about justice. Crime doesn't pay, etc., etc. And he's a liar. He's a liar who wants to destroy Western civilization. He's been working assiduously at that task since 1945. This is from Raphael Mangual at the City Journal. George Soros took to the Wall Street Journal to defend his financial support for so-called reform prosecutors. He began by asserting that Americans desperately need more thoughtful discussion about our response to crime. I couldn't agree more. That's why I wrote a book out last week on our ongoing national debate about crime and justice. Sadly, Soros's piece failed to deliver that thoughtful discussion. Instead, the philanthropist offered a shallow, essentially data-free collection of platitudes. Quote, if people trust the justice system, it will work, and incomplete observations. Soros highlights the statistic that Black people in the U.S. are 5 times as likely to be sent to jail as white people. This, he says, without explanation, an injustice that undermines our, wait for it, democracy. Such a contention is meant to persuade the reader that these incarcerations are mostly, if not overwhelmingly, illegitimate, the product of racial animus more than anything else. What else could it be? Well, how about disparate rates of criminal offending? A Bureau of Justice Statistics study of homicides between 1980 and 2008 found that blacks commit homicide offenses at a rate almost 8 times higher than the rate for whites. Presenting a disparity without any mention of what its causes might be is not a responsible way of arguing that injustice is afoot. It's a serious charge, and as we've seen over the last few years, many who believe it will push, often successfully, for serious policy changes couched in breezy phrases like reimagining public safety. Again, the end point, the end game of this campaign is that black people should not be held responsible for any criminal wrongdoing because this system is white supremacist. And so whatever they do is legitimate. Even if what happened in Minneapolis a couple of weeks, where a black man who had been brought to America from Ethiopia, because that's a very intelligent thing to do, apparently who suffered from mental issues, he went berserk with a gun and started attempting to kill a woman in an apartment and her 2 children, just blasting through the walls. And the police were trying to get him to come out for hours and hours and hours. And finally, he got shot. And then the streets were filled by people complaining about, white supremacy and genocide and all that. And the woman, who narrowly escaped death along with her children, infuriated, ran onto the street to yell at them. And notwithstanding the fact that she was black herself, the mob was on the side of the fellow who wanted to kill 2 children and their mother. But let's talk about happier things. Let's indulge in a little bit of good old-fashioned schadenfreude. It just never fails to amuse. This is a story about Batgirl, who is not to be confused with, Batman, and not to be confused with Batwoman. They're separate things, and I'll get into that shortly. So the world, or part of it, was stunned yesterday when it was announced by Warner Brothers, or whoever owns them now, which owns HBO Max and DC Comics and DC Films, that they were canceling their film Batgirl, which we heard that somewhere between $70 and $100 million had been spent on this. They just wrote the whole thing off. So the film was directed. Oh, it's completed, by the way. It's done. The film was directed by Adil El Arbi and Bilali Falia from a screenplay by Christina Hodson. And she is a person of color. And of course, the directors are people of color. And the film stars a woman called Leslie Grace, no relation. Her actual surname is Martinez. Batgirl has to be a person of color. And you know what? Her best friend is a trans woman, played by an Asian, a Filipina young woman. Because this woman, our hero, Batgirl, she's a skinny young woman, which would be very useful in fighting crime. And her best friend is a small, a tiny Asian woman, which would make it even better fighting crime. So apparently there were test screenings of this film, and nobody liked it. It's a funny thing about Hollywood, that apparently people want to like the things they see in the theater. And if you if they hand out, the scoring cards, and if your movie at a preview gets less than about A minus, it's in serious trouble. God knows what grade this film got. So the whole thing is going to be written off for tax reasons. But the DC extended universe apparently is going to continue. Although I joked this morning in some breaking news that Warner Brothers has decided to shutter the DC extended universe, and all future DC films will be donated to Ukraine to be used as armaments against Russia. And so DC has been trying for years and years and years to rival Marvel, and it's had some hits. It hasn't done all that well, but no, they're just all their IP. They're just going to take all their IP and just jam it together, because people do not want to see anything that's new ever, 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 ever. They want to see Harley Quinn. Well, actually, they didn't really want to see Harley Quinn. But I mentioned that there are other Bat characters out there. There was Batwoman. And Batwoman managed to survive on the CW for 3 whole years. The first season follows Kate Kane, the cousin of vigilante Bruce Wayne, who becomes Batwoman in his absence. And so they hired a woman called Ruby Rose, who's an Australian, who is known for being covered with hideous tattoos, being a lesbian, and looking like a teenage boy. The perfect person that you want to, fight crime in the big city. And so there was a falling out between Ruby Rose and the producers, and she either quit or was fired after 1 year. And so they brought in a black woman, a bisexual black woman, to become Batgirl, because that's what you do these days. And so let's take a look at Javicia Leslie. Okay. Born in Germany to a military family. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention Batgirl. No, sorry, Supergirl. So in the original Supergirl movie, there was a beautiful blonde actress playing Supergirl. And then in the TV series, again, CW, I believe, they had Melissa Benoist to play a very attractive blonde woman. We don't do that anymore. No. The new, Supergirl is called Sasha Calle. And of course, she is a Colombian. She is a Latina, or Latinx, as we're supposed to say. And she is not attractive, because why would you want an attractive woman to be a superhero? Helen Slater was in the movie, and that woman is absolutely gorgeous. But no, not gritty enough. There's no evidence that these casting choices lead to any success. But they just, this film has a trans woman in it. Oh, well, I'm going to plunk down my $12.50 or $15 or whatever, and with the parking and the snacks and all that, maybe $100 for a night out, but it's got a trans woman in it, and that makes all the difference. Oh, some more great news here. This is a series that lasted only 1 season. This is from Mike LaChance at the Gateway Pundit. A series on the Showtime network called The First Lady, that was based on Michelle Obama, has been canceled after just 1 season. This is somewhat surprising when you consider the way Ms. Obama is covered by the media. According to them, she is one of the best beloved and popular figures in the country. If that's true, why didn't the show last? Part of it was I would say, the performance of Viola Davis as Michelle Obama. There's a clip going around where she's talking to a Nigerian actor who was cast as Barack Obama, and it's crummy casting. But Viola Davis she's doing this thing with her mouth all the time, and she looks as if she's going to, bite into people. And there's a clip which is for real, in which Michelle Obama is haranguing her husband. Yeah, that part seems true to life, about how they're not being black enough, that it's time to be really, really black, because black people are being gunned down. Unarmed black men are being gunned down on the streets by police. And the Obama character says, I really want to be out on the streets with them. No, you don't. No, you've never shown that kind of level of commitment to anything. And then I thought it was made up, but it's true. Michelle Obama says, we have been called the N-word our whole lives, and now it's time to really start acting as N-words. It just, apparently the typical reaction to this was jaws dropping to the floor, or people shrieking with laughter. This Showtime thing has all these stars in it, and it's just, there's so many people. This is an effort of quality, right? And very embarrassing to be canceled after one season. Oh, yes, one more thing about Batgirl. The costume that DC came up with for Batgirl is dreadful. It just looks stupid. And as I said, this woman who plays her is not very attractive. We're all afraid of Russia, right? Red's under the bed and all that. Apparently not. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A new Gallup poll has found that a mere 1% of Americans view Russia as a major problem, with far more concern expressed about inflation, bad governance, and the state of the economy. So here's a tweet from Russian American Daily at Russia USA, and it mentions the 1%, down from 9% in March. And then it says, the following media includes potentially sensitive content. So now Twitter is telling me, potentially sensitive content. Am I going to see pictures of people blown up, children, broken like dolls on the street? No, it's just a graph showing inflation and government leadership at number one at 17%, citing this as pressing issue, or most important issue, with crime at 4% and the Ukraine at 1%. Apparently, this is too sensitive to appear without a warning, because as Paul Joseph Watson says, apparently the current thing is no longer as popular as it was. And let's go to Michael Tracy's Substack. America First hawks admit U.S. weapons in Ukraine are plunging down a black hole. It's, when you're talking about billions of dollars being sent to another country, you don't want to see that phrase, black hole, right? I mean, that's not a good harbinger of anything. So Michael Tracy goes around talking to these allegedly American First people at their conference, and they're not American First, quite the opposite. But Donald Trump was invited to appear, and he did, and apparently he had a lot of fun there. But there was a lot of concern about where all these weapons are going to. Someone called Representative Mike Waltz of Florida said, I'm not advocating for American troops on the front lines in Ukraine, absolutely not. But what the British are doing is they're helping with planning. They're helping with logistics. They're helping Ukrainians use the equipment that we're funding at a headquarters level in their supply depots. And the thing I most want to happen is to provide oversight of all these billions that we're providing. Where is it going? Who's using it? How is it being used? We just can't send this stuff into a black hole, unquote. Tracy asked if this plan of his would require congressional authorization, and he did not reply, instead ducking swiftly into an elevator. But think about what Waltz did manage to say. Like the vast majority of his Republican colleagues, he voted for the latest round of $40 billion in war funding back in May. Now, 2 months later, he's publicly admitting the billions that we're providing to Ukraine are going down a black hole. The blunt admission that all this much heralded U.S. weaponry is simply plunging into a black hole from one of the most dedicated pro-Ukraine hawks in Congress, no less, really deserves to be dwelled upon for a moment, not just in the insanity of the admission, but in how it's now being used to justify even greater U.S. military commitments. I'd like to know where and how that equipment is too, Mike. Senator Bill Haggerty, Republican of Tennessee, said to Waltz at one point, in order to fix the mess he created by voting for a bill with no actionable monitoring provisions. Waltz is now proposing to entangle the U.S. even more deeply into the war. And according to Waltz, who's apparently on track to be a top foreign policy sage for the next GOP House majority, this is a totally sensible remedy, because he doesn't envision the troops technically deploying to the front lines, which sounds very reassuring. You don't have to be a scholar of the Vietnam War to know that the incremental buildup of so-called advisors was how the U.S. ended up in all-out war by 1965. Spurred by Waltz's black hole comment, Tracy asked Senator James Lankford, a Republican of Oklahoma, if he viewed the current monitoring provisions for U.S. weapons in Ukraine to be adequate. It's a war, Lankford said, but we don't have eyes on it. So no, we can't tell every weapon, every place, but we do get regular accounting of it. Can you go back and verify all of that? No, it's a war. And so you can't go back and verify all those things as well. I'll take that as a no, Tracy writes. The United States getting involved in essentially a war with Russia over the Ukraine is about the least America first thing I can imagine. But what are you going to do? This is from Esha Krishnaswamy at the Gray Zone. Once condemned by Ukrainian officials and imprisoned for sadistic torture and the rape of minors, leaders of the notorious Tornado Battalion are free under Vladimir Zelensky's orders. After banning virtually his entire political opposition, publishing a blacklist of foreign journalists and academics accused of advancing so-called Russian propaganda, and ramming through a law exempting 70% of Ukrainians from workplace protections, Zelensky has freed from prison fascist militants convicted of some of the most heinous crimes the country has seen since World War II. According to a July 11th report in Ukrainian media, Ruslan Onyshenko, commander of the now disbanded Tornado Battalion, was freed as part of President Zelensky's scheme to release prisoners with combat experience. Along with an unwavering commitment to fascism, Onyshenko is known as a psychopathic sadist who is involved in sexually assaulting children, brutally torturing prisoners, and a murder. Onyshenko's release follows a February 27th order by Zelensky to free other convicted former Tornado members like Daniil Mujahid Liashuk, a fanatic from Belarus who has openly emulated ISIS and boasted of torturing captives for sheer enjoyment. According to Zelensky's decree, prisoners with combat experience would be allowed to compensate for their guilt by fighting in the hottest spots. And there's more that I'm not going to read because it's too disturbing. But we're getting more and more evidence about exactly what the Ukrainians are up to. It's all bad. Here's from Moon of Alabama. Ukraine sit rep on the ground report, Ukrainian frontline collapses. Over the last 2 to 3 months, the Ukrainian side has used its positions in the vicinity of Donetsk city to more or less randomly shell the civilian population on the Russian-affiliated side. After some serious protests, the Russian military command agreed to launch a dedicated counter-artillery operation to shut down the deadly Ukrainian harassment. The systematic counter-artillery campaign has seriously deteriorated the already rare Ukrainian firepower. The meat grinder is the phrase which keeps being used, and the Ukrainians are being slaughtered in multitudes. And there is an account from one of the soldiers. And, well, they're not giving up, but if things continue in this manner, there won't be any soldiers left to fight the Russians. And Moon of Alabama concludes, by the way, the opponent casualty numbers given by the Russian Ministry of Defense are likely overestimated, as all such numbers are. But even if only half of those, around 900 claimed yesterday, really were wounded or killed on the day before, the losses are still devastating. In 1967, at the very height of the Vietnam War, U.S. casualties, dead and wounded, were at maximum about 200 per day. We see a multiple of those on the Ukrainian side each and every day. This is not sustainable. The Ukrainian government should have given up the uneven fight months ago. It is an immense crime to further urge it on. Well, once again, all about taking a stand. And let's go to the chat before I return to James Burnham. Okay, what are we talking about? Jimmy Cagney playing a George M. Cohan in Yankee Doodle Dandy. That's from Anne Run. He then relates his life to some playing the real FDR, with the FDR typically not facing the camera. The Right Honorable says, my opinion of Ukrainians echoes that of Thomas 777, proper decorum and reverence for the good people in the chat that prevents me from further elaboration. He was very funny in Bonnie and Clyde. I don't remember that film being funny at all. I remember it being horrifying. A rather sadistic celebration of violence and just sheer bloody mindedness. Hello to Jeffrey Pye. Perfect. Oh, we're talking about Gene Hackman now. Solid character actor, perfect for his role in the conversation. I think we're talking about Gene Hackman. Let's see. SCTV did a parody of serials, Saturday afternoon serials, and it was about a bunch of bad guys, wearing black in the American West, hooking up with Admiral Tojo. And Joe Flaherty is just it's just so wonderful. His Confederate says, how come you don't use adverbs? And we got Martin Short playing the Festus role. He's called Cheap Laughs. And Roosevelt makes an appearance. And there is dancing. I used to think Hackman was a very great actor, but now I think a little less of him. Not bad by any means, but perhaps it's not as good as I once thought. Well, I have a very high regard for him. And we are well on the way to South Africa version 2.0, says Ruslan Akhmetov. Yvonne Craig, Dan Allison mentions her. I could say about Yvonne Craig, I wonder why she didn't have a bigger career. And it is my honest opinion that Hollywood does not like beautiful people. It doesn't. Take a look at the people who've become huge in Hollywood. There's not very many of them that you would call, extraordinarily handsome or beautiful if they're women. I mean, Robert Redford, he was mocked for decades. And he had to, spend so much time in the sun that he basically turned his face into a catcher's mitt. Let's see. Mike Nichols later said that Hackman couldn't play middle class. Well, the original, the Mr. Robinson in The Graduate, I'm just going to look him up. He was more famous for his TV roles than anything else. But he was just outstanding in John Frankenheimer's Seconds. And let me come up with his name here. Murray Hamilton. Yeah, Murray Hamilton. It's a face that you've seen. He was in Anatomy of a Murder, The Hustler, The Amityville Horror, Jaws, just outstanding, outstanding actor. And the movie was very cruel to him. You know, he was trying to be friendly to that little creep Dustin Hoffman. So he goes out, goes out playing golf with his buddies or whatever, and gets drunk, and yeah, and it makes him a terrible person. Does it? I watched Heist last night with Hackman. I missed that guy. He was always good. He is very good indeed in Heist. I love ballpark dogs, says Buddy. Okay. These movie screening audiences remind me of grand juries. They could indict a ham sandwich, which is to say, who are these people and what motivation do they have? I just, again, I just see these movies that have bombed, and I find out that the audience test score was, A minus or B plus or whatever. What, really? How is that possible? Oh, the Scooby-Doo animated feature got scrubbed too. That was only $40 million. Hello to Ultra Testosterone. Not good. That's my answer to your question. Not good. Perfect as Popeye Doyle, says Jogan 666. Gene Hackman. Yeah. Hackman's wife in Heist, that was Rebecca Pigeon, who is married to the playwright, David Mamet. A lot of people really don't like her. They think her voice sounds affected. Well, she has a very precise way of speaking, which I prefer much more than all the mumbling that we get. I have no problem with the YouTube handle Emmett Kelly's Earth. None whatsoever. Did you see Trump knock out a bunch of rhinos? I did. Hello to Sam B. And let's go back to James Burnham, or in particular, Roger Kimball's introduction to James Burnham's book, The Suicide of the West. James Burnham cut an odd figure in the world of intellectual polemics. He impressed his peers as both unusually pugnacious and curiously disengaged. His background had a lot to do with the mixture. The eldest of three sons, he was born in 1905 to a prosperous Chicago railway executive. His father, Claude, was a classic American success story. At 14, he was a poor English immigrant delivering newspapers at the head office of James J. Hill's Great Northern Railway. 2 decades later, he was a vice president of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, among other lines, traveling with his family in a private railway car. In later life, Burnham objected to the description of his father as a minor railway magnate, but the epithet does seem to cover the facts. Even moderate wealth can be a segregating force, and it was one factor that set Burnham apart from many of his fellows. Religion was another. Burnham's father, who died of pneumonia in his late 40s in 1928, was Protestant, but his mother, in Kelly's phase, was a rigorous Catholic. Burnham grew up Roman Catholic in a world still mildly suspicious of papist influence. Society did not snub the Burnhams exactly, but neither did it welcome them without reserve. And if Catholicism was grounds for distance, so was culture. The Burnhams were a cultivated family. Art, literature, and argument were staple goods in the Burnham household. Young James was musical like his mother and delighted throughout life in playing the piano. He enjoyed an expensive education. When the Burnhams understood that their local parochial schools discouraged their charges from applying to Ivy League colleges, they decided to send James and his brother David to the Canterbury School, a Tony Catholic institution in New Milford, Connecticut. Burnham performed brilliantly in English and math, and matriculated at Princeton in 1923. He majored in English, graduated at the top of his class, and went to Balliol to study English and medieval philosophy. Among his teachers were an unknown professor of Old English called J.R.R. Tolkien. I wonder if Burnham ever recorded his opinion of hobbits. I doubt that it was flattering, and the suave Jesuit philosopher Martin Darcy, who had a magnetic effect on non-believers such as Evelyn Waugh, But while Burnham gloried in theological argument, Darcy's example and tutelage did not salvage Burnham's religious commitments, which he shed without noticeable struggle while at Balliol. I should point out that Kingsley Amis, who was, of course, Oxbridge educated and later became a professor himself there, said that J.R.R. Tolkien was the worst teacher that he had ever had. Now, this was not because of Amis's famous hatred of medieval literature. He rated C.S. Lewis to be the greatest teacher that he'd ever had. Back to Kimball. Being an ex-Catholic is not the same thing as being a non-Catholic, and an ex-Catholic with a taste for theological argumentation is a decidedly strange hybrid. Burnham did not return to the church until the very end of his life, but his Catholic upbringing and intellectual training served to inflect his intelligence in distinctive ways. In 1929, he went to teach philosophy at New York University, a task he discharged for some 2 decades, and stood out not only because of his brilliance, but also because of his tone, a combination of passion, polish, and polemic. One of Burnham's students, Joseph Frank, the future biographer of Dostoevsky, remembered him as very sophisticated, very serious, and very intense. Among Burnham's early colleagues at NYU was the philosopher Philip E. Wheelwright, whose book The Burning Fountain, A Study in the Language of Symbolism, made a deep impression on generations of students. Wheelwright had been one of Burnham's teachers at Princeton. The two had corresponded for some time about starting a new literary philosophical magazine, and in January 1930, 1 year after the debut of Lincoln Kirstein's Hound and Horn, the first issue of Symposium, a critical review, appeared. The first issue of the quarterly contained essays by John Dewey, Raymond Fernandez, the French literary critic, who's probably best known today as a figure in Wallace Stevens' poem, The Idea of Order at Key West, and the philosopher Morris Cohen. Burnham contributed a long review of I.A. Richards' Practical Criticism. It is a canny essay. Burnham judged Richards' book to be the most considerable and the most formidable study of poetry which has appeared in America during the past year. But he also noted that he could not help feeling that Richards' defense of poetry is more inspired, more stirring, and more desperate than any Sidney's or Shelley's. A quote, "To those of us who, however ardent may be our affection for poetry, do not look to it so entirely for the organization of our lives, Richard's defense may seem most damaging to poetry itself, and poetry may appear through his efforts, as in the old twist of Pope, faint with damned praise." Kimball comments, "That's pretty good stuff." Symposium had a run of 3 years. It was an impressive, if sometimes discursively academic achievement. Burnham and Wheelwright snagged essays by Lionel Trilling on D.H. Lawrence, Frederick Dupee on Edmund Wilson's Axel's Castle, Alan Tate on Emily Dickinson, and Sidney Hook on Marxism. Ezra Pound wrote for Symposium, as did Herbert Reed, John Middleton Murray, Harold Rosenberg, and G. Wilson Knight. The first bit of Ortega y Gasset to appear in English, a portion of The Dehumanization of Art, appeared in Symposium, as did important essays on Eliot, a major influence on Burnham's thinking at the time, Valery, and other modernist figures. In general, the magazine lived up to its announced ambition not to be the organ of any group or sect or cause, which may be one reason that Burnham let it fold in 1933. In one of the last issues, Burnham contributed a long review of Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution. He was deeply impressed. That remarkable book, the reading of which was an exciting experience, had strengthened his conviction that a major transition was taking place in the world. As for the lineaments of that transition, perhaps revolution is the apt word, Burnham was more and more coming to see it in Marxist terms. Whatever the internal logic that propelled Burnham toward Marxism in the 1930s, there were also 2 important external factors. One was the Great Depression. Burnham looked around and saw the institutions of American society in crisis. The liberal nostrums seemed useless at best. More likely, their effect was positively malevolent. Burnham loathed the paternalistic big government policies of Roosevelt, describing the New Deal as fascism without shirts. The second factor was the philosopher Sidney Hook, who was Burnham's entree into the world of so-called pragmatic Marxism, Marxism with a human face, or so Hooke thought at the time. Burnham was an idiosyncratic Marxist. It's not that he lacked fervency. On the contrary, as Kelly reports, he fell head over heels for Marxism and labored mightily for the Trotskyist cause. Under Hooke's guidance, he joined the American Workers' Party and petitioned, agitated, organized, and above all, wrote to further its aims. He helped edit, and contributed innumerable broadsides to publications like The New Militant, Socialist Appeal, and The New International. His efforts did not go unnoticed. Before long, he was in regular correspondence with the old man, with Trotsky himself. And although they never met, Burnham became a trusted lieutenant in Trotsky's left-wing anti-Stalinist movement. At the same time, Burnham always regarded the utopian strain of Marxism with a suspicion bordering on contempt. He had too low, too accurate an opinion of human nature to be seduced by the promise of perfection. And while he did not repudiate violence, he was always alert to Marxism's, or any bureaucracy's, sweet tooth for totalitarian strategies. Burnham was also a social oddity among the comrades. In 1934, he married Marcia Leitner, like him a Midwesterner, and moved from New York's Greenwich Village, bohemian paradise, to Sutton Place, adult respectability, where he entertained in a style appropriate to that address. For her part, Burnham's wife always seemed to regard her husband's adventures in Trotskyist radicalism with bemused distaste. It is likely, as Kelly notes, that Burnham was the only Trotskyist to own a tuxedo. When he summered with his family in Biarritz, he perused Marx and Engels during the day and played chemin de fer at night. His acquisition of a summer house in Kent, Connecticut, completed the contrast. Of course, Burnham was hardly the only privileged beneficiary of capitalism to embrace communism while holding fast to his bank account. But his intellectual independence made him an unreliable militant. Burnham happily immersed himself in Aquinas, Dante, and the Renaissance one moment, Marx and bulletins from Comrade Trotsky the next. It was a giddy but unstable amalgam. Unwilling, as Kelly puts it, to sacrifice intellect to militancy, Burnham became an increasingly restless recruit. The break came in 1939 when the Soviets, fortified by the Hitler-Stalin Pact, attacked Poland. Trotsky justified the action as a step toward the abolition of private property, and how? But Burnham saw for what it was, a brutal land grab by a totalitarian power. He wrote as much and in short order found himself expelled from the Socialist Workers' Party and the object of Trotsky's rage. Overnight, Burnham went from being a favored, if somewhat wayward collaborator, to being an educated witch doctor, strutting petty bourgeois pedant, and the coup de grace, an intellectual snob. Burnham's response was to gather his correspondence with Trotsky and dump it into the incinerator. By the end of the 1930s, Burnham was a minor but respected public intellectual. In 1938, he began a long association with Partisan Review, the premier intellectual organ of the anti-Stalinist left. But he did not become an intellectual celebrity until 1941, when The Managerial Revolution, What is Happening in the World, became a runaway bestseller, much to the surprise of its publisher and the chagrin of the several houses that had turned it down. Written at the moment when Hitler's army seemed poised to overrun Europe, the book is a grim exercise in dystopian prognostication. It is not, I think, Kimball writes, one of Burnham's better books. As he himself later admitted, it is still full of remnants of Marxism. Above all, the depressing aroma of economic determinism and praise for the superiority of central planning. But The Managerial Revolution certainly is a bold and impressive book. Its vision of the rise of an oligarchy of experts and alignment of world powers into three competing superstates made a deep impression on many readers, not least on George Orwell. Orwell wrote about Burnham at least 3 times, reviewing The Managerial Revolution in 1944, and then in long essays about his work in 1946 and 1947. As Kelly notes, Orwell found The Managerial Revolution both magnetic and repellent. Orwell criticized Burnham for power worship, for being fascinated with the spectacle of power, and hence contenting himself with analyzing rather than condemning Hitler's military successes. Burnham's essential intellectual failing, Orwell thought, was in predicting a continuation of the thing that is happening. Nazi power is on the rise, ergo, it will continue irresistibly. American capitalism is in crisis, ergo, it will necessarily disintegrate, except that the rude, unkempt force of reality intervenes, transforming those ergos into might have beens. With hindsight, we can see that Orwell was right, that Burnham underestimated the advantages, military as well as social, enjoyed by a democratic country. His neat schematic intelligence lulled him into believing that the apparently better organized nation was going to be the victorious nation. Burnham undervalued the advantages of the ad hoc, the unexpected reversal, the sudden inspiration. His besetting sin, Orwell said, was to overstate his case. Quote, he is too fond of apocalyptic visions, too ready to believe that the muddled processes of history will happen suddenly and logically, unquote. Orwell makes the arresting observation that during the Second World War, the smarter Brits were often the most pessimistic. Their morale was lower because their imaginations were stronger, he wrote. At the same time, Orwell repeatedly underscored Burnham's intellectual courage and willingness to deal with real issues. And it is clear that whatever his criticisms, Orwell was deeply influenced by the managerial revolution. In 1984, he adopted wholesale Burnham's idea that the world was reorganizing itself into three rival totalitarian states. The managerial revolution itself appears in Orwell's novel under the title The Theory and Practice of Oligarchic Collectivism. And I'll have more from Kimball's essay on James Burnham on tomorrow's live stream. Yes, almost receive prizes. Who will be the first woman to walk on the moon? How about a helicopter-flying mother of twin girls, ex-UK rugby star, an Iraq war vet nicknamed Animal, with two N's, are among 9 female astronauts who could make a lunar landing in 2015. Does anyone believe that NASA will be back to the moon by 2025? This is Sam Tonkin at the Mail. NASA has created a short list of 18 astronauts, including 9 women, for its Artemis moon missions this decade. Here, Mail Online looks at the female hopefuls who become the first woman to walk on the moon in 2025. They include a Cambridge graduate, Iraq war veteran, nicknamed again Animal, and ex-University of Bath rugby star. One of the 9 astronauts will soon be chosen by NASA to become the first woman to work on the lunar surface. Yes, we need a woman to walk on the moon, and preferably a woman of color. And then we have portraits, both figurative and literal, of the contenders. Kayla Barron from Richland, Washington, who is actually a rather attractive woman, I must say. Christina Koch, or Koch, however you pronounce this. And there are many ways to do so. But we're just leading up, to the non-white candidates, is what we're doing here. It's fairly obvious it's going to be a non-white candidate. Anne McLean, 6-1 against the Animal. This is a very, I believe this is the same woman. Let me scroll down here. Yes. She would go on to make the first all-female spacewalk alongside Jessica Meyer. In 2019, McLean was investigated and subsequently cleared by NASA over what was characterized as the first alleged space crime. She was accused by her estranged spouse of improperly accessing bank records while on a 6-month mission aboard the ISS. After being cleared of any wrongdoing, McLean's former partner, Summer Warden, was charged with making false statements to federal authorities. Yes, a lesbian catfight played out in space. You can't get much more entertaining than that, can one? Jasmine Mochbelly. Oh, she's the skateboarding chopper pilot. Ooh, that's pretty daring. And Kate Rubins. Oh, the virus hunter. Formerly a microbiologist, epidemiologist. Jessica Watkins. Yeah. Probably her. Probably her, or yeah, Stephanie Wilson identified as the favorite because it's all intersectional. I am not claiming that these women, these candidates, are not, talented and competent. I'm not making that claim. However, when an institution says it's got to be a woman, then I think, okay, maybe they're not so talented and competent. How about you just select the people who are the most talented and competent and who aren't, say, likely to get involved in a hilarious lesbian cat fight in space? Oh, just as a PS, who are the men who make up the 18 strong Artemis team? We're not interested in them. No, 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 no. And this is from Revolver News. Is this the dumbest New York Times headline of all time? That's, that's a pretty big field. And let's see, what is the headline? Investing in real estate as self-care. Many women seeking independence after breakup or divorce have discovered emotional empowerment and even healing in real estate investment. This is by Jennifer Miller at the Times. Rochelle DeVoe was 2 weeks shy of closing on a home with her partner of 10 years while their relationship imploded. Her future suddenly snapped into focus. She was 30 and had a successful career as a marketing strategist, but she'd never feel truly secure without a permanent roof over her head. She took a leap in 2019 and bought an investment property, a duplex in Missoula, Montana. Yes, it's just all the worst people in the world are moving to Montana now. Intending to live in one unit and rent the other. It was the crappiest house on the block, she said, but it was what she could afford. I made the decision entirely from a financial standpoint. What I didn't realize was how much confidence and pride and empowerment I'd feel. It had so many tangential benefits with that emotional feeling of, I did this and I did this for me. Our author continues, investing in real estate or becoming a landlord has inherent stress, especially in a volatile market. But many women seeking independence, especially after a breakup or divorce, have discovered emotional empowerment and even healing. They've conquered a steep learning curve, often in the face of skepticism, and they found a unique support system where excising relationship ghosts is as important as learning to negotiate interest rates. You have a group of women who are really looking forward to develop themselves personally, said Becky Nova, 38, a cancer researcher in New York City who started an organization called Lady Landlords in March 2020. We're not crocheting. Boo! We're building generational wealth. Who knew building generational wealth was so easy? You go, girl. Revolver comments, you really have to read the whole thing. There are many more hilarious case studies of eat, pray, divorce, go on a real estate shopping binge. These ladies are in for a rude awakening if this economy crashes and this housing market turns upside down. And yes, all these relationships, marriages, whatever, breaking up. But apparently you can still make money on real estate. So, swings and roundabouts. This is a tweet storm, an account called Indian Bronson. He's commenting on a tweet from Rob Henderson. Large study of 11,196 romantic couples. Nothing. Age, education, income, appearance, sexual tastes, interests, hobbies, health, values, etc. could predict whether two people were happy in their relationship. Indian Bronson comments, exactly the traits you'd expect. This list do correlate with desirability in dating, but not happiness in a relationship. Much more likely to predict romantic happiness is one's relationship with oneself, even divorce, actionably so. And yes, so we have, hang on just a second here. Yeah, It seems that the universe is conspiring against people. The universe doesn't want people to be together anymore. That this is becoming a class thing. Stable relationships are for the upper class, the 1%. And what was that book, Charles Murray's book? What's it called? Coming Apart. It's one of the themes of that book. This is another string from Spotted Toad. Every few weeks, Twitter gets consumed by an upper middle class, usually white woman, blowing up or mimicking blowing up a seemingly enviable marriage out of boredom, pique, or vaguely politicized midlife crisis. I suspect this is an expression of the end of American egalitarianism. Due to a combination of economic, cultural, and demographic trends, the percentage of Americans able to build and maintain solid nuclear families is diminishing, likely passing into a minority. But everyone knows also that the way to build and pass on social capital is to have this kind of family. The pandemic made the last part especially clear. Trust in institutions to protect you and yours, or even to make public institutions and public space available to you, is a fool's gambit. And you will either be in mutual dependence on a family or alone in a windswept heath or pod. And so professional writers and cartoonists and others whose work depends on justifying our present society to itself are tasked with explaining why actually this is right and fair, why the emergent rules that weaken family bonds and leave people helpless are in fact just justice. And so these writers take on a pharmacos-like role as both queen and scapegoat, reveling in how their seemingly enviable lifestyle, $1 million home, a handsome, kind, and dutiful husband, healthy, attractive children, are as nothing before the greater gods of ending the patriarchy. And the discourse twists and turns for a day or two between people saying, "That bitch crazy," and people saying, "You go, girl." But the greater purpose seems to be to justify an emergent order that reserves lasting marriage for the few and offers a virtuous virtual loneliness to the many. And he points to a piece of research which is called Family Structure and the Reproduction of Inequalities. And I will just read from the abstract. Here we go. Over the past 4 decades, income inequality has increased and family structures have diversified. We argue that family structures become an important mechanism for the reproduction of class, race, and gender inequalities. We review studies of income inequality and family structure changes and find a wide range of estimates of the correlation. We discuss how increases in income inequality may lead to increases in single motherhood, particularly among less educated women. Single motherhood, in turn, decreases intergenerational economic mobility by affecting children's material resources and the parenting they experience. Because of the unequal distribution of family structure by race and the negative effects of single motherhood, family structure changes exacerbate racial inequalities. Gender inequalities also increase as mothers incur more child-related costs and fewer fathers experience family life with children. And there is a prime example of what Spotted Toad was talking about at the New York Times, because of course it would be the New York Times. And how old is this piece? September 30th, 2021. Divorce can be an act of radical self-love. And it's by someone called Laura Bazelon. How many of these Bazelons are there? They're like the Dworkins. They're legion. Ms. Bazelon is a professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law and the author of the forthcoming book, Ambitious Like a Mother. Oh, you see what she did there? I used to believe that divorce is a terrible thing, particularly when children are involved. Growing up, I absorbed cultural tropes about absent fathers, inefficiency apartments, mothers struggling to support themselves, and awful step-parents and unwanted step-siblings. To this day, divorce is portrayed as precarious and grim, Parents whose marriages break apart are made to feel they have failed catastrophically. Divorce is shameful, traumatic, and bad for the kids. But I've learned that divorce can also be an act of radical self-love that leaves the whole family better off. My divorce nearly 7 years ago freed me from a relationship that was crushing my spirit. It freed my children, then 5 and 3, from growing up in a profoundly unhealthy environment. There was no emotional or physical abuse in our home. There was no absence of love. I was in love with my husband when we got divorced. Part of me is still in love with him. I suspect that will always be the case. Even now, after everything, when he walks into the room, my stomach drops the same way it does before the roller coaster comes down. I divorced my husband not because I didn't love him. I divorced him because I loved myself more. Mm-hmm. This woman is absolutely appalling. Absolutely appalling. But she gets to preen and posture in the pages of the New York Times. So that's worth something, right? So you know what is racist? Well, everything is racist, but there's lots of things that are racist that you wouldn't have thought initially to be racist. Quiet. Yeah, quiet. This is from The Atlantic by someone called Xochitl Gonzalez. And where does he live? Where does he live? Can you guess where he lives? Brooklyn. Yep. Brooklyn. Why do rich people love quiet? The sound of gentrification is silence. Yes, New York in the summer is a noisy place, especially if you don't have money. The rich run off to the Hamptons or Maine. The bourgeoisie are safely shielded by the hum of their central air, their petite cousins by the roar of their window units. But for the broke, the have-littles and have-nots, summer means an open window through which the clatter of the city becomes the soundtrack to life. Motorcycles revving, buses braking, couples squabbling, children summoning one another out to play, and music, ceaseless music. So he made his way to an Ivy League college, but he's not going to stop telling you just how persecuted he is. You don't live on an Ivy League campus, you reside on one. Living is loud and messy, but residing is quiet business. I first arrived on campus for the minority student orientation. The welcome event had the feel of a block party, blasé, blasting on a boombox. It was the 90s. We spent those first few nights convening in one another's rooms, gossiping and dancing until late. We were learning to find some comfort in this new place and with one another. Then the other students arrived, the white students. The first day of classes was marked by such gloriously waspy pomp that it made my young, aspirational heart leap. Professors and academic regalia gave speeches about centuries-old traditions and how wonderful and unique we were, the best class yet. Kids sang a cappella and paraded with a marching band. I'd spent my high school years sneaking out to drink 40s on the beach. Ooh, wow. Wow, the mean streets. 40s, eh? Scheming my way into clubs. I understood that was what was happening around me. It wasn't exactly cool, but it was special, and I was part of it. I just hadn't counted on everything that followed being so quiet. Hints would be taken, eyes would be rolled. We'd call it a night. One day, when I accidentally sat down to study in the library's absolutely quiet room, fellow students shh me into shame for putting on my Discman. With rare exceptions, like Saturday nights during rush, silence blanketed the campus. I soon realized that silence was more than the absence of noise. It was an aesthetic to be revered, yet it was an aesthetic at odds with who I was, who a lot of us were. Within a few weeks, the comfort that I and many of my fellow minority students had felt during those early cacophonous days had been eroded, one chastisement at a time. The passive-aggressive signals to wind our gatherings down were replaced by point-blank requests to make less noise, have less fun, do our living somewhere else, even though these rooms belong to us too. A boisterous conversation would lead to a classmate knocking on the door with a "please quiet down." A laugh that went a bit too loud or long in a computer cluster would be met with an admonishment. In those moments, I felt hot with shame and anger, yet unable to articulate why. It took me years to understand that in demanding my friends and I quiet down, these students were implying that their comfort superseded our joy. And in acquiescing, I accepted that. I hope he hung his head in shame. I'd taken the sounds of home for granted. My grandmother's bellows from across the apartment, my friends screaming my name from the street below my window, the garbage trucks, the car alarms, the fireworks set off nowhere near the 4th of July, the music. I had thought these were the sounds of poverty being trapped. I realized in their absence that they were the sounds of my identity, turned up to 11. Oh, there was Selena playing in the background. Oh, gentrification happening in Brooklyn. And of course, this writer for The Atlantic is no way part of this gentrification. Oh, a 27 woman new to Brooklyn was standing there exasperated. Did your mothers not teach you the difference between inside voice and outside voice? For generations, immigrants and racial minorities were relegated to the outer boroughs and city fringes, far but free. No one else much cared about what happened there. When I went to college, it was clear to me that I was a visitor in a foreign land and I did my best to respect its customs. But now the foreigners had come to my shores with no intention of leaving, and they were demanding that the rest of us change to make them more comfortable. Jim Kunstler pointed out quite some years ago the reason for the popularity of Starbucks. It's pleasant space that you can rent for the price of a cup of coffee and perhaps a biscuit. Of course, as we've learned, Starbucks is no longer so pleasant anymore. It's become the hangout of junkies. But that's a good thing, right? Because it's diversity, right? Oh, now let's talk about being a Latinx person. It is a loud affair, and I take pride in saying that we are a loud people. Is it a coincidence that one of J-Lo's biggest hits was Let's Get Loud? I think not. We love our music. We love to dance. Oh, we love being Puerto Rican. Okay. And perhaps this is why the parade inspires so much discomfort. In the 90s, Upper East Siders implored the city permit office to move the parade to the Bronx, to their neighborhood. A 2003 New York Times story reported that one day a year, the Upper East Side takes a deep breath and prepares itself. Only after Michael Bloomberg, then the city's mayor, made a public appeal did retailers and property owners along the route stop boarding up their windows as if a hurricane were barreling down on the city. Some restaurants and coffee shops still close for the day. Probably prudent. But no. To seek quiet is to seek the comforts of white supremacy, it would appear. Is that guy Fauci? Is he still around? And why is he still around? This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. Anthony Fauci complained Monday that Americans are refusing to adhere to COVID restrictions while asserting that everyone should still be wearing masks indoors. Fauci made the comments during an interview with Katie Couric, blaming so-called misinformation for influencing people to ditch face coverings and avoid vaccines. Fauci whined, unfortunately, given the fatigue that we're at in this country from 2.5 years of this, everyone is tired of it. It's very difficult, superimposed upon an anti-vax type feeling among some, superimposed upon the political divisiveness we have in this country, and social media misinformation and disinformation. What would be that misinformation and disinformation? That the vaccine is not stopping people from getting infected and getting infected repeatedly? How about that? Perfectly safe, perfectly efficacious. That's what Fauci told us. That turned out to be not true. But somehow he still has a job. This is from Jim Hoft at the Gateway Pundit, as promised earlier. I don't know if you've heard, but many healthy young adults are developing heart issues and some are suffering heart attacks from this. It is so sad to hear these stories, and unfortunately, no one can seem to figure it all out. If you did a Google search 1 month ago for the benefits of cold showers, you would find many links to videos and studies that show how good they can be for you. I use a cold shower on a daily basis for many of the benefits. Cold showers and ice baths have been used for athletes for a long time to recover from hard workouts. There are many studies that show cold water will help your immune system, which is something we could all use. Now, I'm sure the caveat is that if you have heart issues, don't jump into an ice bath or have the water at the coldest level. Just as if you have heart issues, don't go out and run a marathon, start with a half-mile walk. The reason I bring this up is that if you Google cold shower today, you're going to find out that cold showers could be the cause of the rise in heart attacks in the youth. Yeah, that's just a normal thing for people in their 20s and 30s to have heart attacks, and for them to get brain clots, blood clots in their brain. I mean, they always have, right? That's nothing new. Let's go to Eugippius. Our clown health minister, Karl Lauterbach, and our useless liberal minister of justice, Marco Buschmann, have finally agreed on draft legislation to replace our current Infection Protection Act, which expires in September. As predicted, the compromise is masking and not much else. Specifically, the federal states will receive the option to impose indoor mask mandates with exceptions for those who can present negative tests or have recovered from infection or received vaccination within the past 3 months. As Julian Reichelt notes, masks will thus become a compulsory, if temporary, label for everyone who refuses dose number 4. My greatest regret about the law is that it frees the tested and the recovered from mask requirements. I prefer that only the vaccinated present bare faces in public so they can be subjected to the proper content. I was going to write more about my outrage at this ongoing farce, but I find myself too depressed to do so. And let's take a look at Alex Berenson's Substack. The Price of Fear, Part 3, Canadian edition. This is only a partial post. The rest of it is paywalled, but what is included is quite interesting. Last month, I asked for your first-person stories of the way COVID and vaccine restrictions changed your lives. One substat was particularly striking, those from readers in Canada. Australia may have had stricter rules, but I'm not sure any democratic country did more to ostracize citizens who dared to question its COVID responses. As these emails show, Canada's response to COVID quickly tied into the country's complicated feelings about the United States and Donald Trump. Canadians disliked Trump even before COVID. In a January 2020 survey, only 28% said that they trusted him to do the right thing, a lower percentage than people in Japan, Britain, Australia, or even Italy. So once Trump's handling of COVID became a central controversy in the epidemic, support for strict countermeasures became the norm in Canada. And Canadians pride themselves on being nicer, fairer, and less partisan than Americans. As a Canadian immigration group proclaims, Canadians value equality, respect, safety, peace, nature, and we love our hockey. Way to roll with the stereotype. People have asked me this before. Are Canadians nicer than Americans? And my answer is Canadians are not nicer than Americans. They are more polite than Americans, but that's not quite the same thing. Berenson continues, but that admirable ethos comes with a dark side, an unwillingness to stand up to authority, and a passive-aggressive shunning of those who do. This is the right thing to do, and who are you to say it isn't? For glowing vaccinated hearts. Yes, this is an ad for Vaccination Canada style, highly stylized. There's the maple leaf. It says for glowing hearts, which is a phrase from our anthem, O Canada. For glowing vaccinated hearts, they don't mean myocarditis, right? Canada banned COVID unvaccinated people from air travel long after it was clear both that airplanes were not a major transmission vector for COVID and that vaccines did nothing to stop transmission. Hard not to see that policy as anything other than punitive, a way to hurt people who had chosen not to be jabbed. The response to the trucker protests this winter was similarly over the top. And the viciousness didn't stop with the government. As the stories below make clear, employers and families ostracize anyone who spoke out or wouldn't follow the rules. And let's go back to the chat. I may end the show a little early today because I have to go out. Well, I don't have to. I'm choosing to. Don Willis says, I thought all these years that cold showers was something only my ex could give me. William Hicks, where do you live? Michigan, he says. Since you can't add your own condiments anymore, Starbucks is superfluous, says Chogakin666. Don Willis, birthplace of the Motor City Madman. That's Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent, yeah. Someone was pointing at, rock nicknames. Motor City Madman. That sounds pretty impressive. Mark Bolan's nickname was the Boppin' Elf. That does not sound very impressive. Don Willis says, so many office girls at my clients' offices are dressed like saggy-o lesbians since the Great Sweatpants. Mr. Chuck the Buck Norris says, has Canada always had an inferiority complex toward America? Well, I can only speak for my lifetime. It has an inferiority complex masquerading as a superiority complex. I think that's the best way I could describe it. Hello to Metal Mike, who says, well, Pierre Polyev, save us all. I'm not a fan. Anron says that Bonnie and Clyde was funny and the scene centered around Gene Wilder's character. Hello to Rescue Steve. The Midwest can't be the blighted fentanyl wasteland it sometimes looked like, says Hauper. Boland was prettier than Nugent, says Jogahin666. Well, before he got fat, and he got really quite fat. Would Canada be better off if the U.S. had conquered it in 1813? I'm just trying to think of a country that large, I believe that small is beautiful, like Schumacher. There's still people in Canada who entertain these fantasies of the United States taking over all or part of Canada. I can't see it happening. I mean, when we talk about Quebec secession, it was obvious to me, and it's obvious to any intelligent person, that if Quebec had voted yes in 1995, that would have been the end of Canada, just like that. Because what are we going to keep up this fantasy, like, Pakistan before the war with Bangladesh? Oh, yeah, they're just thousands of miles separating us, but we're actually one country. No, not going to work. Palcasso88 says, it's hilarious how the Canadian media thinks Polyev is a white nationalist. He loves immigration even more than Trudeau does. With Montesquieu and not Madison then, said Emmett Kelly's Earth. Art Mob, hello, says Rand Paul is having a Senate gain a function increase soon today. I think Fauci is first up. Quebec was prepared to sign a free trade deal with the U.S. The kind of hostility that English Canada has played towards the United States, it's largely absent in Quebec. I mean, so many Quebecers have left the province over the years to settle in New England, and now they retire they spend their vacations in Florida and they retire in Florida. You can get the French language newspapers in Florida. And of course, there's some element of pique there. Oh, the English Canadians have a problem with the United States. We don't like the English Canadians, so we're going to say we don't have a problem with the United States. Okay. Do we have anyone else here? Boarding up is not a good idea. You should do what the Mexican neighborhoods did in Chicago instead, says respectable commenting name. Well, thank you for your kind words, Don Willis. William Hicks says, haven't been in Starbucks for a long time. Used to enjoy the fashion show early in the AM. Couldn't believe how stylish the typical lady office worker can be. Clothes, shoes, hair, makeup, surreal. Alrighty. What a dramatic. Okay, yes. Uh, I like silence. You know. I just when I see all these people with the headphones, the buds or the big ones, and they're walking down the street, and I'm thinking, you got to control the environment at all times. There, you got to have music blasting in your head. Um, you know, I'm surprised more of these people are not run over by cars, particularly since so many of them are on bicycles. How can it be legal to be listening to headphones when you're on a bicycle? But no, you don't want to take part in the world with everyone else. You know, you're special, as it were. And I know that, you know, well, people have known this for the longest time that so many people, wear headphones because they simply do not want to have to interact with any other person. Emma Kaiser says the old gray lady will never top the New York Post headline, headless body in topless bar. No, that would be a deaf one. Although at Alberta Report, this was before I started there, but was considered to be the all-time best headline for a magazine article. At that magazine, it was about a lawsuit against a fraudulent psychic. And the headline was The Seersucker Suit. I suppose there's a lot of people who've never heard of seersuckers suits. Okay. And I listen to podcasts, says Chogakin666. People don't bother you as much when you're listening to podcasts. Yeah, that's true. That's true. No question about it. There are no birds in New York City, says Chogakin666. Really? And I have a seersucker jacket, says Emmett Kelly's Earth. And I'm going to wrap it up with that. 9 minutes early. I hope you're not too offended. Thank you all for tuning in. Greatly appreciated as always. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And tomorrow is Thursday. So it's Theater Thursday. And the movie I'm going to be discussing is from, I believe, 1956. It is directed by Alfred Hitchcock. It is called The Wrong Man. And it stars Henry Ford and Vera Miles. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace at shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.